Good afternoon, everyone. I hope your day is going wonderful. Thank you for joining us today as we continue to celebrate our 10th year Women's Conference by A Maven's World. Today is part 2 of our Future of Women of Color series, and my name is Anna Foster, founder and CEO of A Maven's World. Today, you will hear from our panel of experts, and we will be discussing Money Matters, closing the pay and wealth gap of women of color. Whether it's pay inequity in the workplace or barriers to capital for women of color entrepreneurs, it is unfortunately a fact that Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and other women of color are disproportionately impacted by the gender wealth gap and are economically marginalized. The COVID-19 recession, or shecession, as it's been called, has deepened and exacerbated pay inequality by gender and race, which will have lasting impacts for generations to come. This session will explore the wealth gap that continues to perpetuate inequalities. We will also discuss essential solutions and tools that are necessary to tackle the issues in all its form. Addressing this concern is not only important for the financial well-being of women, but an essential step in rebuilding our economy and must be a focal point in recovery efforts in the present and the future. So please share this video with your friends and your family and your coworkers and your network, because it's going to be an amazing discussion with our panel of experts. And April is Financial Literacy Month, which makes it even more important that we share this information with you. So enjoy what's to come. It's going to be an amazing conversation, and we are so excited that you are joining us today.
Thank you, Anna. I'm so excited to be a part of part 2 of the Future of Women of Color in series by A Maven's World. Today we're discussing the topic of Money Matters, closing the pay gap and wealth gap of women of color. My name is Monet Ewing, and I'm a Vice President at State Street Global Advisors. Our first panelist is Sasha McKenzie. Sasha is a Vice President and Deal Principal at Wellington Access Ventures. At Wellington Access Ventures, Sasha helps manage the firm's private company investment activity in diverse early stage companies and venture capital funds. That was a mouthful, Sasha. So I know it's a lot to do. It was a lot to say. Our second panelist is Rosario Ubelia Minaya, the Executive Director and founder of Amplify Latinx, a nonpartisan collaborative movement whose mission is to build Latinx economic and political power. And finally, we have Jenny Gaffard. Jenny is a business instructor and advisor at Optima Entrepreneur Cooperative. She's also the founder of Surplus Financial Consultants, a personal finance and credit education company whose mission is to help change toxic narratives around money within minority communities. Welcome, all of you. Thank you for being here to help us unravel this really important topic. If you go to the website, you can see the full bios of our panelists, who are very impressive. Something I learned in preparing the webcast is that March 15th, 2022 was Equal Pay Day. And I really don't know how we're supposed to mark that. So if anyone has any suggestions on our panel or even from the audience of what you would do to mark Equal Pay Day. Is that something the employees, the employer is supposed to be doing? Because I really want to be ready for March 15, 2023. But let's start with defining what is the gender pay gap. In a nutshell, it's when women make less than males just because of their gender. So if you think about it, all things considered, if you have the same experience, education, job, you're in the same industry, you will make less than your male counterpart just because you're a woman. And it gets worse for women of color or women of color who try to accede to higher positions. So today we want to talk about this topic and hear from our panelists on what's being done and how should we think about this to improve our own careers going forward. So I'll start with kind of a broader question before we really kind of peel back the onion of what does an equitable future look like for women of color to each of you? And I'll start with Sasha.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I feel so honored to be here with this incredible group of women and really excited to talk about such an incredibly important topic. And so in terms of what an equitable future looks like for women of color, to me, you can really look at this question in a variety of contexts. And equity really is the recognition that we don't all start from the same place. And really, especially as women of color, we definitely don't start from the same place as anyone else. Equitable future for me is one in which we consciously equal the playing field for women of color so that they have the same opportunity to achieve as everyone else. But I think true progress can be made if people make intentional choices about where their dollars go. So while there's a lot of different ways to equal the playing field, this is one in particular that I've been focused on and that I've honed in on, which is, as a consumer, making a conscious decision to buy products from women of color owned brands, or as a hiring manager, intentionally building the networks, not only to attract, but to retain and promote diverse talent. And I also look at this in the context of the venture capital industry, and really an equitable future for me for Black female founders is that they are able to raise venture capital dollars at the same rates as everyone else, and that fund managers are allocating capital to women of color GPs.
Jenny, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think an equitable future is like.
Thank you so much. And again, it's an honor. Thank you, Anna, for creating this platform. There's not many things I will co-sign with, but Sasha's response is one of them. For me, equitable future for women of color really gets down to one core sentence in my book, which is women of color are paid, invested, and recognized for the value that they bring to the workforce, the value that they are within the workforce, without sacrificing their peace of mind and their mental health. I think a lot of women currently are experiencing a loss of peace and a loss of not only funding because of this unfair playing field. So outside of co-signing everything Sasha has mentioned, I think one key component is recognition of the value that they bring within the workforce, as well as without the sacrifice of their peace and mental health in order to acquire it.
And that's going to be interesting to talk about because I think Sasha brought in some outside factors, meaning how we can invest in other companies of women. And you brought in kind of the internal of what we need to be comfortable with in being in our skin and feeling the value that we bring to companies. So there are lots of different aspects of this that we can talk about. And we'll find out, kind of what Rosario thinks, and then maybe start digging into some of those topics separately. So Rosario, we would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Thank you so much. I agree in terms of being really excited about being part of such a stellar panel. I'm just so honored to be included. And thank you, Anna, for creating this space for us to host this type of discussions that are so vital. And I totally agree with what Tasha and Jenny have shared. It's definitely two perspectives that are so important to continue keeping in mind in terms of what equity looks like for women of color in terms of the pay gap spectrum. What I can say is that my work focuses more on women of color in general, but specifically advocating for Latinas in this space. And there's so many disparities that we face as women of color, and as we go down and look at the different groups represented there, there's also a series of disparities that we are paying close attention to. But in the spite of awareness of the issue, we really haven't seen much change in over 30 years. And even though some progress has been made here and there hasn't been really a push that reflect, that systemic change needs to happen. So all of the examples or ideas that have been shared are very important because those are things that we can do more on a daily basis and continue moving this forward. But I will say that until we get to systemic change that is part of legislation, we can really make the dent. And that's where I'm focusing on. Um, Recognizing that our federal laws have been inadequate to close the wage gap is really important because at this point we still have individuals and companies that question that there's a pay gap, which is crazy. So there's a whole national movement that is working on strengthening equal pay laws. And we have other states outside of Massachusetts that have been making progress around that. So one of the things that I want to bring to the discussion is that like providing really a space that provides information that is essential to measuring the progress toward racial and gender wage equity in Massachusetts and in the nation. There's different legislations that have been put forward that we need to continue looking into and supporting so we can get to a point where there's a law that is behind the movement and that can give us the cushion to continue improving in this aspect.
I wanted to just share that Rosario made a great point about women of color and Hispanic women in particular, because data shows that Hispanic women have the largest pay gap among the uncontrolled pay gap, which means that Hispanic women make 78 cents for every dollar that the male makes. And interestingly, the Black woman makes 98 cents for every dollar the male makes. So we're 1 cent less than the national average, which to me says Hispanic women have the greatest pay gap and Black women have the greatest pay gap when we're all measuring equal factors: education, experience, jobs. So we both have a big fight to make change, as we were talking about just a minute ago. So it seems like there's lots of way to get at this, and that some of it is external, some of it's internal. Do we have an ability to affect the external factors keeping the pay gap in place, do you think? I'll ask Jenny.
Absolutely. I think losing the awareness that we can impact change. One of my favorite quotes from my grandmother, and I feel like at least every single one of our grandmothers has mentioned this: if you give something to a woman, we will multiply it. We are multipliers by nature, right? So I believe that in order for us to really impact and cause change and movement, it starts with us understanding what we want, how we want it, and learning to unapologetically advocating for it and supporting one another as we advocate for it. Because just because as a Black woman, I am 1 cent or 2 cents short of the dollar, it's a problem because my Latinx sisters are still significantly behind. So really recognizing that this is our issue and we get to support and advocate for one another in it.
How do we do that in our daily careers? How Sasha, how do you help to close that gap as we talk about being truthful and making sure we recognize that it's affecting all of us and trying to solve the problem collectively? How do you see how your firm and how your company is affecting that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think the first thing that we can do is be allies ourselves, and also to count on and lean on our allies when it comes to some of these issues. Wellington is making a ton of steps, or taking a ton of steps in this area, and I'm really, really proud to be a part of Wellington management, because this year we released in March our Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion report. And in this report, it to me sets out a ton of key strategic objectives. First, by measuring and taking stock of where we are today. And secondly, where we want to be tomorrow. And thirdly, proactively, what are the steps we as an organization are going to take in order to achieve these very specific goals? And so when I think of how we can help each other when it comes to the equity pay gap, I think it's by, one, having conversations like this one and really leaning on each other for support. Asking your sister, can you guide me to some resources in terms of what equitable pay in my industry looks like? And being super supportive of each other when it comes to these issues, because we can be there for each other. And I think not only that is reaching out even broader within our networks to find ways that we can build allies and, again, support around us as well. So it kind of starts with being an ally ourselves and also building a network of external support and allies, so that when it comes to really defining where we should be from an equity pay gap perspective, we're well informed and you have that support.
So I'm just wondering, I was hoping that you could share, as a woman, how do you assess when or know when you're receiving or not receiving equal pay versus your male colleagues at the company? I find that when you're at a corporation or a company, that sometimes compensation matters are not something that are easily found or evident. So I'm just wondering, Rosario, do you have any suggestions on how women get to know what their worth is and what they should be asking for? How would you recommend someone go about that?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. And you're right. There's a sense of privacy and kind of like just blocking off that conversation that has been installed in all of us. We don't ask about salaries, we don't question, but I think it's coming to a point that, given the awareness that we have about the issue, we need to start being more transparent and open around these conversations. And one of the things that I've been very interested in is really getting to a point where there's transparency in releasing salary information from top employers and companies, where we can really see what really goes on. Because there's a lot of assumptions around some of the salaries, and especially at the C-suite level, but we rarely see the numbers. So again, going back to some of the efforts around legislation that I'm focusing on, there's a lot of push around getting to a point where companies are expected and asked to report on an annual basis how they're doing with their salary ranges. And that really opens up the floor for having those conversations and really understanding where we really at in terms of the gap. So I think what we can start doing now is really getting more informed around the realities of what we're facing, not only going by the assumptions or thinking that because you are part of a really established company that you are getting a salary that is apart, but really getting a good picture of what's going on. And I think at this point it's not easy, because these are conversations that we are just trying to incorporate now. But I think that as women of color, like Jenny said, we have to be unapologetic about getting to the point and getting to those conversations and asking for the information that we need. And we can do that among ourselves by being open and sharing that information, but also tapping into those allies that are going to be able then to provide some access to the information.
Thank you. Sasha, what comes to mind when you hear that the statement, you can't manage what you can't measure? Is that getting to kind of open disclosure and the things that Rosario are pointing out as how we can do better?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great question, and to me emphasizes that organizations really have to start somewhere when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it really begins with them taking stock of where they are, setting goals, and defining an action to change. And so Wellington's done a lot when it comes to this, and I think I'm really proud that some of the things from a measurement perspective, I really feel like they have taken a wholesome approach. They really measure progress from a DE&I perspective and a pay gap perspective by looking at both like quantitative and qualitative methods. So we have a diversity dashboard that measures different things like gender, individual racial groups, by age and generational mix. We measure the employee experience by talent engagement surveys. We gather feedback from people, from their managers. And, I think all of this together and informally in our global DE&I report provides that transparency that Rosario was talking about. And for me, it's kind of like the first step is providing that transparency. But then as part of this question, you can't measure, you can't manage what you can't measure. It's really, really taking stock of where you are as an organization today, and then defining a plan that really helps close some of these gaps. And one thing that Wellington is doing in particular when it comes to equity pay gap is focusing on getting more women into the leadership pipeline and into leadership roles. And this is a really concerted effort that they're focused on to help really dive into these issues and ensure that moving forward, they're addressed directly.
That's a great pivot. I was wondering, I think about kind of career progression and what barriers, in front of women to move up the ladder in companies and get to where all of you guys are, where you're leading your companies. I'm wondering, Jenny, can you share if there has been a point in your career that you felt that you were not given the recognition or been promoted when maybe you should have, or?
There wasn't a point where I felt like I didn't receive the recognition. However, there is something I wish I had prior to really entering the corporate space. I wish I was taken to the side and told to create a record of my accomplishments and really keep track of that as a woman of color, because there's a lot of skills and things that we develop and we don't measure. So what ends up happening is when we then have the conversations with our managers or those people making the decision, we don't have a record of this is why. This is not a conversation that is coming from just nowhere. I have proof, I have record that I have been progressing. And it took a mentor really telling me that, and honestly, I think every single person has to have a corporate lingo mentor, someone to help you navigate the language. It's a whole different language. Office politics and all of that is important to understand in order to really climb up the ladder if that is your choice, because the nuances is where some of these decisions are made. And one of the greatest takeaways that I've taken that's helped my growth is taking and measuring, managing my accomplishments and not waiting for someone else to do so.
Powerful. Rosario, I know you're founder of your company, and what were some of the career barriers that you faced in trying to achieve kind of starting your own company, and what were some of the career barriers that you would say you faced in moving up the ladder?
Well, I would say there were plenty. As a professional that was growing and going into a journey of going on my own with my own business, but then also someone that has been in the nonprofit space for a while and kind of like trying to navigate those two spectrums and finding that balance or medium was interesting. But also, a lot comes also from my upbringing, my personal experiences, some of the opportunities I had, but as well as the challenges I faced. So I brought up all that with me. Like, for example, I'm not only a Latina, I'm a Black Latina. So there's, a whole set of the challenges that come with that. I'm an ESL learner. I'm an immigrant. I was formerly undocumented. So there's a whole of different issues that come with me and experiences that I bring that make the recipe of who I am and what I bring to the table. So with that, again, there's opportunities to bring a different perspective that is I would say fresh in kind of different, but at the same time, tons of challenges with these assumptions and expectations of who I am before I even come into the room. So just with all of that, there's that confidence that I have to bring that I didn't necessarily have fully 100%. I'm still working on it. So it's like an ongoing journey with not only my identity and my skills and all of that, but really with that confidence that I'm capable and more than able to do what I want to do. And at the beginning, I did rely on others to kind of like speak for me or make the case for me or be that kind of like that person that opens the door, which is great, especially when you start, that someone kind of champions you and opens the door for you. But after that, you just have to take it on and face it. So I think that that's one of the lessons that I have learned in terms of not letting someone else to represent me in the space that I'm making for myself. And that has been not an easy thing. So I will say that confidence in that I have what it takes is one of the greatest challenges that I have faced, that I have put up myself, but also that the spaces that are in already have been kind of like conditioned to that. So breaking those barriers have been challenging.
Are there things that you think companies are doing to make women of color comfortable? And not that we need to be comfortable, but we want to have a workspace that we can also succeed, like our male counterparts, our white male counterparts. Are we doing enough in that space to I want to say encourage, retain women of color? I'd love to hear what you guys think about that.
I will just close my comments with answering that question because I think we are not doing enough. There's way more that needs to happen. I think there's a little bit of awareness now that something needs to happen, but not everyone has the all the tools to make it. But I think that whatever we try to implement, we need to start doing it. and no wait for like an instruction book to get us there. I think we just need to start implementing small steps, and one of them, I think, again, is to really open the space to let us be who we are, with our leadership style, with everything that comes with who we are. And I think that when we go into some spaces, especially in the corporate world, there's already a culture that we kind of like expected to fit in. And yes, we work around that, but also the expectation is that it goes both ways. And if you really want to diversify your company and your space, we need to look at it both ways. And I think a lot of us put on the women of color that is coming to the table to educate everyone else, to adapt to everything that is being already there, instead of really looking deeply into the structure and the culture of the organization or company, and be unafraid to challenge that, and create a space that is more equitable in many different ways.
That is a big ask when you think about as far as companies that have been operating away for a long time and they have lots of employees, because you don't only have to change the company, you have to change people, and that's that's not something. So I'm just wondering, Jenny, what are your thoughts on that too, on how can we get there?
Oh, there's so much, Rosario. I'm like, yes. All right. I'm going to approach it this way. I think one of the things is just acknowledging that there is a difference between women and men and women of color and women in general. I will say this up front. I think one of the issues that I've had in the space is just a lot of the books that encourage personal development and growth in women of color were written predominantly by white women, Caucasian women. And I don't always find that helpful. Some of the resources is great. I think there is, we need to create a space where we allow women to come in the fullness of themselves, right? Whether that means my hair is locked. The fact that it took, what year did it take before this was considered professional? Come on, this is how it grows from my head. Like, and just really being mindful of what we're calling professional, right? And what we're calling different terms, right? Are me showing up bubbly and relatable does not mean that I'm not able to do the work. I've had people say, because you're so cheerful and you have a young presence, that I don't know, I'm concerned. I'm like, that actually doesn't make sense. So really, really inviting the fullness of women of color into the space, and just also having honest conversations that aren't having honest conversations about what leads to promotions in the space. I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that.
Sasha, it seems like there's a lot of positive things happening at Wellington Management. How are they tackling some of these issues?
Yeah, there really is. And I just want to say, I resonate with what you ladies said so much in terms of leadership style and allowing space for different leadership styles to excel within organizations. When you've been kind of a monolithic organization over time, you tend to just, put success on a certain type of person, leadership style, and so I 100% agree and can relate to you on that, and just having the ability to come into an organization and for us to feel like we can lean into what our competitive advantages are and our leadership styles. I think and that be rewarded and that be accepted and that be viewed as you know, a different way maybe to get from A to Z, but one that is highly achieving and successful, I think is an amazing point. And you're right. Wellington is doing a ton in this space, and you know, we have our Chief Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, Shauna Ferguson, who's made a ton of headway. In addition to the entire firm more broadly, has really taken a collaborative approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you know, it kind of goes back to, from my perspective, in that taking stock of where you are and building a plan of action to get from point A to point Z and holding yourselves accountable for that. I know Wellington does that at the most senior levels. They have an accountability mirror in which senior leaders at the firm, from our Chief Human Resource Officer to Shauna Ferguson, to our President, Steve Quar, and they get together with leaders to basically hold themselves accountable. Where are the gaps? What can we be doing better? And how can we address that full on? And so, you know, as an employee, a more junior employee, being able to read about that in our report and seeing, you know, the types of actions plans that Wellington does have in place really is so encouraging to see that. You know, a lot of organizations, they put out these very beautiful diversity statements, and that's great. But for me, when it comes with, you know, not only how are we going to recruit more diverse women into our firm so that, you know, I, Sasha, can see an ND or managing partner one day that looks like me. So how are we not only going to recruit these people into our firm, but also retain and promote them, you know, is key and something that the firm is super focused on. So I think it's really exciting, and you know, I think progress, you know, that's all that I look for and ask for, is like, you know, progress is being made, and people are taking really direct and conscious steps to make that progress.
What do you see in your areas where, I mean, I think when you talk about diversity and inclusion, you always have to make the argument or case that is good for business in order for people to kind of get behind it and support it. Are you finding that hard to do, or do you think it's easier now to make that case that diversity is good? Because I feel like that's the kind of dialogue that you sometimes have to have with your colleagues when, you know, they could be thinking, oh, I'm not getting this promotion because this is what we're focusing on at this time. We're focusing this year on diversity, and maybe it's hurting my chances when you're talking to a male counterpart that maybe not be getting promoted because they think that women of color or Black males are taking those positions now. How do you respond to that? And I'll start with Rosaria.
I will say, bring it on. It's all based on what we bring to the table. Like, let's do this. And going back to that transparency, you know, I think that in terms of promotion and compensation, we have to, you know, like Jenny said, bring our skills forward in our accomplishments. So that at the end is what companies should be looking at in terms of who's going to be the best fit for the position. Of course, looking into any biases that are around the process, but you know, we come with the confidence and the skills. So the best player wins, I guess.
Sasha, any thoughts?
Yeah, this is such a interesting topic, because one of my mentees before told me directly once that one of her peers said that she was only there because, you know, of D&I policies and this, that, and the other. And my advice to her was, okay, show him how good you are, show the firm how good you are. I know how good you are, and I will be your champion, and I will say your name in every single room. You go and do the work and show them that, you know, you more than have what it takes to be here, and more than deserve a spot to be here. So It's really interesting how this comes up, but I think I 100% agree with Rosario. You know, the best person, you know, should have the promotion, or should have the recognition. And so I'm a firm believer in just showing people, you know, what you have, and working hard, and that we all do deserve a seat at that table.
Mm-hmm. Jenny, do you have any magic ways to show that it's good for business, or how do you address that argument when you hear it?
I don't address that argument because that argument is silly. This might be a very millennial response of mine. If I have to prove to you that diversity is important to not only the well-being of your company, but also the well-being of you as an individual, when you interact with different people of different opinions, different cultures, you become a well-rounded person. Well-rounded people listen better. They solve problems faster. So I love my grandmother. My grandmother says, and you guys will hear me quote a lot of grandmother quotes, if you argue with a fool, you become a fool. I don't have, because at this point, if that is your stance, you are standing in foolishness. And I believe that my energy, my time, my intelligence, my skill set is better in bringing it on, as Rosario shares, doing the work, because I'm not here to impress you. And I think one of the things that a lot of us as women of color need to realize, and I talk to my girlfriends all the time about this, you don't have to prove to people who don't want to see it that you're amazing, because you are amazing, period. Do the work. Let the work speak for you. Let the work speak, and take it into account. Write it down. Make sure that you're keeping count of the work working, right? Because I think one of the things that I've unlearned, especially in 2020, is I'm not here to do work to impress people. I'm here to serve. And it took a lot internal working for me to realize that, like, in chasing approval outside of like the work and just my desire, my life's mission statement, it left me burned out, and it left me resentful. So I do the work. I'm not arguing with fools. That's just how I take it.
I love it. I love that. Do you think that sometimes, when you had mentioned diversity of thought, do you think that sometimes that is now being used to, I want to say, excuse when there aren't the practices around putting a diverse slate forward? We have this slate of candidates, or we have plenty of diversity of thought. It doesn't necessarily mean diversity of women or of color, women of color, but as a way to justify, we're still achieving what we're trying to achieve with diversity of thought, but not necessarily with the numbers as far as people. I don't know. I sometimes think that sometimes people mix those diversity of thought and diversity and inclusion together so that they can justify when numbers aren't showing the right result.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Actually, I'll step back so Sasha or Rosario, that you guys can share.
What I can share around that, and it's more resonating with, again, what I'm doing now through Amplify Latinx, is going back to those reports and those numbers that we've been pushing for companies to be more transparent. And sometimes the numbers get lumped into categories, and we don't see really what's really there. So one of the things that we are asking, which is again a very difficult ask, and not many companies are open to it, so it's kind of like an ongoing discussion around this, is to really break the diversity category into the different, areas that are included there. And that really shows a different picture when you go deeply into those numbers, because when they put those diversity numbers out, they look, so some of them look great, but then you go into it and you start noticing that there's only one woman, or out of the women that are there, there's no one woman of color. So there's, many different things that you can find out. So I think that is what comes to mind when you ask that question. But overall, I think, some organizations can kind of like cover themselves with these conversations around equity and inclusion and diversity. So it's again going back to what is really happening and having the honest conversations that are not really easy to have, especially with organizations that feel that they're doing their part and that they're bringing, an structure into place that is gonna contribute to an equitable environment.
Sasha, how at your company have you been having those conversations? Is that something that you expect to come from the top down? Is it something that employees are doing? How do you broach these topics of diversity inclusion within the workforce, and not just at the senior levels?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think that fostering the environment to be able to have some of these discussions is what's key. And so, having affiliation networks that specifically address these topics, and not only within, not only holding a panel within the affiliation network themselves within the company, but also broadcasting that and bringing in different perspectives so that the entire firm is up to date and can learn and hear and see and do. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to have these ongoing dialogues around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and at all levels. And so even a more junior person can take the lead and bring in a bunch of awesome HBCU students to do a pitch competition at the company. And I think what's great is just allowing space for people to express themselves and to really dive into things that matter to them. And so, to your point, while a lot of it's important that it happens from a top down, I think from like a measurement and an ongoing focus standpoint, allowing space for everyone to be in the conversation and to really lean into and dig into topics that matter is important too.
Jenny mentioned before about how people expect you to be as a leader. Are there any characteristics that you see or would advise someone coming up in the workforce that appear negative for a woman? Or how would you advise someone in their career to be themselves, or to often if you're trying to be yourself, you're compared to how men act when when they probably don't spend that much time thinking about it. So how do you think about that? What kind of characteristics as a woman do you bring to the table that either one, help your career as a leader, or hurt your career as a leader? I know that's a loaded question. So Jenny?
So loaded.
I think the topics when they talk about if you're a strong woman, and then they think you have no compassion, or just that's kind of the nice word that they want to call you at that time. But what kind of traits do you think are negative or hurt women, and women of color when they do become senior managers or higher in the company?
Yeah, great question. I think there's just one characteristic that stands out for me, and I would say standoffish. So appearing to not want to engage juniors and kind of help them mature. That would be one of the negative negative characteristic that I would say is highlighted for me. I'm I have such strong feelings about characteristic like aggressive or anything of that sort, because just because you're intimidated doesn't mean I'm intimidating. So that's just one clear thing, just really defining, are you coming off aggressive, doing a
Mhm.
self check, and also having a group of personal advisors that you can run the play, say, hey, this is what happened. Let me know if I came off um, different from what I intend. So really understanding there's a difference between intent and impact, but you have to first decide and clarify what that looks like for you. I am completely okay with, in certain spaces, being seen as assertive, which is the other word that they really want to use, but they're having issues with words when they're saying aggressive. You're saying I'm assertive. Thank you. I appreciate that. The other thing I would say, just the last thing I would say, a lot of women, we need to be mindful of is using a lot of apologetic language, especially in email format, or especially when we're speaking to leaders. Don't apologize for your position or you being in the space. That is something that we learned, and it's something that we have to unlearn. Yes, be mindful when, if there's a space where you have to apologize, apologize. And I'm not going to apologize for being. That is not something that is something I had to unlearn, especially in email, saying I'm sorry. Why are you sorry? uh, so being mindful of that. I hope that answered the
No,
question.
absolutely. Sasha and Rosario, I saw you guys shaking your head in agreement with Jenny. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think would be great to take some questions from the audience as well. I'll just add very quickly here that I 100% agree with the apologetic language, Jenny. It's something that I've 100% had to work on. Also have had to work on passive language, like saying things like, I think this or maybe this, and just being more direct, particularly in emails. So I couldn't agree more with you there.
And I agree, and we should go to questions. But I do wanted to add that in terms of what Jenny shared, of kind of like be mindful of also how you receive feedback and information, because just in myself, I've been conditioned to be defensive, because I feel like in every step throughout my journey as a professional, facing challenges, I've been kind of like unfairly put into positions where I have to defend myself. So I come in already with that mindset of being ready to pull out that list and they say this and that, and being kind of like more about trying to again find that balance between when you feel that you are unfairly being targeted, or just receiving feedback. And I think I have to learn that, and learn how to manage that. But definitely, the language, the way we communicate, um, be mindful in many different forms of communication. Another thing that I do want to bring the perspective of women of color. Again, we are representing many different subgroups under that, and there's a lot of different cultural, nuances that we bring too. For example, for Latinas, it's like that stereotype of being, feisty or saucy on coming in and expecting all of that, and not playing that part. I'm not that. So, I come with a very different style. So, I guess educating and battling that. For Asian women is that sometimes that or Indigenous women to be accommodating. So, all of those things are negatively affecting the way we are perceived and showed in the space because of those assumptions and stereotypes.
One of the questions from the audience is, how can women support other women in their organization? Jenny, you want to start there?
I can. One of the ways that women can support other women is placing their names in the room. That is such like a key thing for me. And I'll, that's one. Second is just transparency, having honest money conversations. So my girlfriends and I, we talk about salaries. We also talk about negotiation. We support one another with negotiation. I actually have one of my girlfriends right now going for a director role, and she's like, "Hi, I just wanted to communicate. I'm dealing with imposter syndrome. Please help." Right? So just supporting, being a sounding board. Uh, Recently with the Judge Jackson's appointment, just seeing the attack, one of the most beautiful part of that whole conversation was seeing how her girlfriend n- presented her in this space. I was like, yes, yes. So really being an advocate for women that you see, bringing them into the space with you and knowing that it's not a challenge for more of us to be in the space.
Sasha, could you give some advice to some of the women in your organization of how you support other women?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jenny really hit the nail on the head there. My biggest piece of advice is saying another woman's name in a crowded room. I've used this tactic before, and you would be so surprised how quickly someone's name can fizzle to the top if it's heard enough times. So is this person super technical? Like, oh yeah, she's crazy technical. Who's some of the top performers? She's definitely one of the top performers. And so I think that's the number one way. And I think secondly, just being able to have open and honest conversations with one another and being able to be that sounding board to provide authentic feedback, not in the formal way that sometimes you have to do when you're working at a company, but in a super informal way. If you see something, give that person that feedback. If you see someone, hey, you're appearing, or I'm hearing that you're appearing to be X, Y, and Z. Don't just let that poor person go on, acting how they're acting. Be an advocate for them and provide them with that constructive feedback. I think those are really the two biggest ways that we can support one another.
Since this is really also about closing the pay gap, how would you recommend that women negotiate their next pay, their next salary? How would you recommend that, Rosario? What should they be doing now to prepare for that?
Definitely bring that list of accomplishments to that conversation. Like Jenny said, what a great advice that I also didn't have early on. And I'm learning to compile that information in a way that is useful, the way I present it to the conversation. And going in a clear with your expectations of, being assertive in that way that you are coming clear in what you're asking for, with information that back that up, because I think we in the past 3 years we've been dealing with a lot of different challenges, economic challenges, that have affected all of us in different ways, but in many ways, in our income and our local economy, things have changed a great deal. So we need to be educated on how that is affecting us, and bring that to the table as well. The COVID-19 pandemic, the all the economic turnout that happened, and that we're still experiencing, is affecting our day-to-day lives. So on top of what is deserved in terms of our compensation for the positions that we are in. We also need to factor in the external, factors that are affecting our lives and how that have changed in terms of how compensation is calculated. So I think all of that is important to be educated on and have the tools to have that discussion and educate your employer on that as well.
Sasha, any words of wisdom on the topic of how you negotiate a salary for our audience, in addition to Rosario's comments?
Yeah, absolutely. Just come with the data, do your homework, come into the negotiation with tons of data, have those conversations, like Jenny mentioned, with friends, and prepare yourself for the negotiation. And I think the one key thing is a lot of times hiring managers will ask you, what are your salary expectations? Just know you don't have to answer that question. And you can really flip that question back on them and ask them directly, what's the salary range you guys are thinking for this role? And I think that's honestly one of the most powerful tools, is just knowing you don't have to, say what you were making before. You don't have to say what your intentions are in terms of what you want to make first. You can kind of get what they have to offer first, and then go from there with, like Rosario mentioned, all the hard work, your list of qualifications, and why you deserve more. So that would be my advice.
Rosario mentioned the impact that women felt from COVID, and instead of a recession, the term was we went through a shecession. Jenny, can you share how you think we can move forward from that impact and what we should be doing now to prepare ourselves in that?
Really quickly, since we're wrapping up this awesome conversation, I would say one of the things to be mindful of outside of what everyone has shared is recognizing that you can also negotiate things outside of your salary, benefits. What does it look like to, and that was something I didn't know, that you can negotiate how much time off, what does it look like, and really ask questions about the culture. I think one of the biggest things that we have yet to really see the impact in our community is the impact COVID has had on our mental health. And mental health plays a huge portion on our ability to build wealth and an ability to work in certain spaces. So being mindful that it's not just navigating COVID and the shecession, that it's not just about the money, it's also about the culture. Are you able to thrive in that space, and having honest dialogue and having them answer the question? Because a negotiation is not only them asking you things, it's you asking them. They're under this interview too. The interview goes both ways.
Yeah. Well, in closing, I'd like all of you to give maybe your elevator speech on what would you say to future women leaders of color. I'll start with Sasha this time.
I'll try to make this quick, but what I would say is just never, ever, ever give up. Persevere. When I was applying to business school, I was told so many times that there's no way I could get into Columbia. And even if I did get in, there's no way I could pay back the huge student loans after. I was told that there was no way I was going to get hired by a big bulge bracket investment bank. And I was told that I couldn't be an early stage investor. I didn't have the skill set. I didn't have the network. I didn't have this. I didn't have that. And all I can say is, here I am. And so what I would say is, again, persevere, never, ever give up. And also make sure you're surrounding yourself with people who, when you have that tiniest little bit of doubt, they say, nope, no, Sasha, remember this that you've done, remember this that you've done, remember, X, Y, and Z that you've done. That can really kind of be your champions and allies along the way. So that would be my advice.
Thank you. Rosario?
Yeah, wow, Sasha, that was great, and I completely agree. I would say that what I can add to that is, apart from being yourself, again, unapologetic, just show up and be who you are, is to then, in the moment that you are in right now, if things are not in working the way you planning, evaluate where you are in and make the hard decisions. Sometimes we try to fight it in a space or an organization or a company that, at the end, is not gonna be that space for you, and we don't have to stick around if that is not working. There's always other options that we can look into and make a plan to make that transition. But I think sometimes we have to make the hard decision of, reevaluating where we are and moving on. It's okay. It's okay with moving on and trying something different, going into a different space, or create the space for yourself, like I did.
Yeah. Thank you, Rosario. Jenny, we'll let you close us out with your words of wisdom.
I have 3.
Okay.
You are enough. I'm going to piggyback from Rosario and saying, don't stay loyal to a thing, to a position, to a situation that leads to disharmony with yourself. That's number 2. And number 3, we're not going to talk about it. Build your own personal brand. It goes back to the advocating for yourself, because then it allows jobs to come to you instead of you going to jobs all the time.
Well, thank you all. This has been really awesome. I'm sure our audience has gained quite a bit. I want to thank you guys all for sharing all of your input and all of your advice that you've gained over the years. And I look forward to seeing all of you in a future panel or hearing more from you in the future. Thank you very much.
That was such an amazing conversation. I am certainly inspired and empowered by all of the information provided today. It certainly enlightened me and will help me in my journey. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for the Future of Women of Color Series Part 2 by A Maven's World, entitled Money Matters, Closing the Pay and Wealth Gap of Women of Color. I want to thank our guests, our panelists, Rosaria Ubera Manaya, Sasha McKenzie, and Jenny Gefford. And a special thanks to our wonderful moderator, Monet Ewing. I would also like to take this time to thank our sponsors. Without them, this program would not exist. So thank you, State Street Bank, Wellington Management, Eastern Bank, Mass General Brigham, and the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. Thank you to our community partners, the Dinner Group, the National Black MBAs of Boston, Startup Life with Andy Leon, Boston Impact Initiative, Amplify Latinx, and NESB Boston. We hope you enjoyed today's program, and we look forward to seeing you next month in May for part 3 of our series on the future of women of color.